My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today we're going to talk about the dark side of validation. Now, just so we're all on the same page, here's some definitions of the word validation. We can look at confirming the validity of, or to prove that something is correct. Now, I think one of the most important skills a therapist can have, along with empathy and compassion, knowledge, all of that, we have to look at a therapist who can validate their clients. It's extremely important. Validation makes people feel good, it legitimizes them, and it helps to build trust between the therapist and the client. But my question for today is validation always good, and is there a dark side? Well, being that I'm making the show, you could probably take a guess that I do believe that there's a dark side. Let me start off by saying my personal and professional point of view is that validating somebody's feelings is always good because their feelings are real. People feel what they feel. But the question becomes, should you validate or always validate their perceptions that help them to feel the way they do? Now, keeping in mind that if somebody has a perception, whether right or wrong, that is their reality. So it becomes very difficult to challenge them. And in the mental health field today, I would say most therapists, and there's a lot of evidence to back this up, is that most therapists lean on the side of validation rather than bringing about awareness and then moving a person to empowerment. I don't want to make this sound sexist, so I think I'm just going to touch on it just a little bit. But the field today is about, well, let me leave out the percentages. It's overwhelmingly female. And women do tend to lean on the validation side. And the men in this field tend to be more on the feminine side, typically, obviously not all. But they also lean on the validation side. And I think there's a real dark side to this. Many therapists, they are afraid to challenge people. They're afraid to call out their cognitive distortions, their irrational thinking, irrational or dangerous behavior. Sometimes they're afraid to call out lack of morality, lack of decency, a person's inability to be objective, their lack of commitment to trying to do better in their life, maybe their inability to take responsibility or to move towards positive action, or maybe even unskillful ways of managing their emotions. And personally, I think if people want to move forward, because the goal is always to learn more, it's to improve more, and it's to have post-traumatic growth rather than sit in a victim mentality the rest of your life. I think these things need to be challenged. So yes, validate feelings and emotions, they're there. But we really have to challenge all of these other parts if a therapist is to truly do their job. Now, if we look at something like life coaching, they've been doing an amazing job of taking away a lot of therapy type of clients. And the reason why they can do this is because they are almost 100% moving towards awareness and getting people to their goals and having them look at reality as it is. And this is what makes people successful. So because mental health clinicians have gotten soft and weak and spend so much time on validation without moving people to being better, they think that they can make more money by having the same clients come in week after week without actually doing any work. They think there's some type of money flow there. Whereas actually, if they want to be more of a service to the community, and they'll end up making more money in the long run, is by actually helping people go from point A to point B and getting away from this victim mentality. We need to have them see life as it is. We need to challenge their perceptions. Let's take a logical look at somebody's life. I've seen a lot of clients over the years, whether it's through personal training or whether it's through therapy. And a lot of times you just listen and we can do the validation, but you don't always have to agree. This is why we need to challenge it. So again, let's take a logical look at a person's life. Is it possible that their parents are 100% evil 100% of the time? Is it possible that everybody around them hates them and has it out for them and is trying to hurt them? Is it possible that every person that they try to have a romantic relationship with is a jerk and they have no say or power or anything to do with the way that relationship is going? Everybody else's spouse is wrong, deficient, on drugs, but they're okay? Is it possible that every employer fires them just because they want to see them poor and destitute? It doesn't make sense. What needs to be done is that we challenge them if they really want help. Unfortunately, a lot of the times they don't want help and they leave. And listen, bring on the next person who actually does want some help. So you might be asking right off the bat, like, why do these stories and what is their narratives? Why do they need to be challenged? So I'm going to answer that question, but I also want to look at this other question. Why should we try to help people see others' perspectives? And the quick answer on that is that the healthier a human being is, the more that they'll be able to integrate the full story. Because typically, it's not 100% to 0%. The world is not black and white. There are many shades of gray. So if you hear somebody speaking with, this person is horrible, and they're not taking any responsibility, you got to start asking some questions why they're having trouble in this world. And we can't validate, yes, your parents are horrible. Let's put you on anti-anxiety, antidepressant medications. Your parents were terrible, you'll never get over it, let's blame them. Meanwhile, you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 60s, and we're still blaming parents here without seeing any of the good along the way. It makes no sense. So I was trying to come up with some reasons of why we can't trust people in the stories that they give, the stories that they've been telling themselves for all these years. And I worked on this for like 2 minutes. I came up with like 5. There's probably 50, but let's just go with the 5 that I wrote real quick, just to show you how easy it is to come up with reasons why we should not trust people at face value based on what they're saying about other people. So, number 1, relying on memory is never 100% accurate, and it's subject to being skewed and embellished. And the longer of a time you keep telling the story, it usually gets embellished even more. Number 2, individual perception is almost never objective. Actually, it's pretty narcissistic. Most people only see it from their side of what they want, of what they need to get. They very rarely try to see what it's like to deal with a person like them. Number 3, attribution theory. What does that mean? It means, to whom do you attribute the problem? Well, how many people take the blame for things? Typically, almost all the time, people will attribute the problem somewhere else. It's the mother, it's the father, it's the spouse, it's the guy down the street, it's my employer, it's whoever. They blame everybody else except for saying, what should I do? What have I done? Who did I choose to be in my life? None of these things, they don't look at that. Number 4, let's talk about traumatic events. Traumatic events are remembered more by the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is the fear center, the emotional part of the brain. So, traumatic events are remembered by the amygdala as opposed to the prefrontal cortex, which is all about logic and reasoning. So if something happened that was traumatic a long time ago, or even yesterday. Most of our memory is geared in the fear center of the brain. It's not dealing with logic and reason. We're going to need to have more than a superficial look at this problem. We're going to have to really take a look at what the situation is and how to take that trauma and grow from it. Because again, we need to have a serious, real look at it, even if it was the most horrible thing in the world. And I know a lot of people have gone through some pretty horrific things. The truth of the matter is, today's another day, tomorrow's another day. It's not going to help to sit in the negativity of the past. We have to move forward in a positive way. It's okay to look at it and validate that it happened, true. But we have to look at other ways and other perceptions to see how do we actually grow from that. And number 5, we suffer from repetition. Telling yourself the same story repeatedly for years makes us invested in that story, closes us down to other stories and other perceptions that might be there. And it has the potential to turn us into professional victims. A while back, I was doing some of my own soul searching, my own therapy, so to speak, and I have talked to therapists. Let me tell you a little bit of a story here. I'm 56 years old, meaning I was born in 1965. My parents were divorced when I was about 5, so that puts me around 1970. Around 1970, 71, 72, my father was a relatively angry, violent guy. And because he thought he was not around very much, that he thought he needed to parent me extremely strictly and sometimes physically. Talking to therapists, other therapists around me who I know, they would try to over-validate. Oh my God, that must have been so terrible for you. How did you overcome such incredible, nasty damage? Your father was a horrible human being. Are you trying to sell that to me? Like I overcame this thing? I don't see it that way, right? Because there are other perceptions. You know, it's this thing too, when someone has a client and the client starts telling everybody, I suffer from anxiety. I suffer from depression. I suffer from substance abuse. You do. But your therapist sucks. Because if you had a real therapist that made you see everything, okay, that made you see different perceptions from other people, they would make you realize this as well. If you're in a relationship or you're in a family and you suffer from depression, everybody around you suffers from depression too. Maybe you need to know that because you affect other people. If you suffer from anxiety, you're not suffering alone. You're making everybody else suffer around you. It's kind of contagious. If you're suffering from substance abuse, so is your spouse. Like, that might be hurtful, but it's reality. And that's one of the things. No therapist should try to blind their clients. It makes no sense. Let's go back to my father for a second. I see my father in totality, not just for a bad thing he did when he was like 22 years old. Back in 1970 or 71, at that time, men thought that if a man was not there all the time, that their son would be incapable of being mentally and physically strong enough to handle a very tough world. They also believed with a woman around all the time and being raised by a woman that the man or the boy would probably be gay. Now, listen, nothing's wrong with being gay, except I'm speaking in the year 2022. Go back to when my father was a very young man. Not a therapist, by the way. He worked at a gas station. So he was doing the best that he could with the level of awareness that he had. And understand, The DSM, which is like the Bible for all mental health clinicians, up to 1973 deemed that being gay was a mental health disorder, brought on sometimes by not having a father in the house. Just the thought of that, if I continue to blame my father the rest of my life, who's the narcissist here? Who's the uncaring, unforgiving one? It would be me. By the way, my father was right in a lot of ways. He did create a man who is very powerful, very strong, that everybody around him, meaning me, can depend on me. And back then, through the 70s and 80s, it was a pretty tough world. And he was right. And I was able to compete in sports and do my thing. Have you seen the average boy or man today? They're still living at home, playing video games, playing with themselves. I've been over this before, but it's always worth saying because it's kind of funny. Sitting there, smoking marijuana. Why? Because they can't manage their own feelings and emotions. My father was right. A lot of men were right too. I'm not saying violence is okay, but I'm saying that he did the best he could. And by the way, he was never physically violent with me after, I think it was after I was 6, he realized that that was the wrong thing to do, and he did this thing. It's called improving, because people do that sometimes. And I'm not going to hold him to something when he was in his early 20s, when he died at 75, and supported everything I've ever done, and was a great guy. My parents got divorced when I was 5. I saw my father every Sunday, because we had a visitation with my father. I saw him every Sunday until I was 25 years old. And that would have existed for longer if I didn't move to Las Vegas. But then, of course, he moved here, right, to be near his kids. Oh, but he sucks as a father because he did a bad thing when he was 22. No, listen, any therapist that tells you to blame your parents for the rest of your life sucks. You need to start taking a look at yourself about what you can do. I'll give you another example. My mother comes from a family where her father wasn't around very much. He was in the military. Her mother was an alcoholic, so she had her own, let's say, ways of dealing with life, codependency issues and stuff like that. And maybe she parentified me a little too much when I was young. That's true. But you know what? My mother loved me. She did the best she could with the awareness that she had. And then I tried to improve the rest. None of us are perfect. Stop blaming your parents. Stop blaming everybody else. I hear this all the time. I'll see some kid and they're telling everybody how their parents are horrible, and it's amplified because of the therapist they have is validating their perception, but they don't even know their parents. They'll say, well, I was parentified. Well, maybe one of the parents was checked out. Maybe they got divorced. Maybe one parent died. And the child raised to the level of keeping company with the parent a lot. And maybe that child saw more than he or she should have. Maybe he or she was involved in more things than they should have been. Maybe at times the parent was kind of a friend to their child. Okay, got it. Is that the end of the world though? Should that parent be crucified because of that situation when that parent was doing the best they can? Then they're going to go to a therapist and the therapist is going to say it's your parent's fault. That person parentified you. When if you talk to the parent would tell you, I did everything possible to give that kid a good life. It's possible that they were overindulged, that they spent too much time with them, that maybe they have a lack of self-esteem because they babied them too much because they were afraid of them getting hurt. Maybe. Can we have that conversation? Or do we just want to validate a child's point of view that doesn't understand or know what the perception of what was going on in the parent's mind? So the show's getting to be about 20 minutes long. I think you understand my position here. So again, validate feelings. Always, always, always. Very important. But validating somebody's opinion or perception of maybe something that happened 30 years ago. Back then, you probably didn't even have a command of the English language. So yes, some bad things happen, guaranteed. But when we validate too much, we're trying to prove that something is correct. And maybe there's other ways to look at it. Again, the more healthy a human being is, the more able they are to integrate the dark with the light, the good with the bad. And as if I didn't have to tell you, not everybody's good and not everybody's bad. Every great person in this world's had bad days. If we can't accept that and forgive, why in the world would we expect somebody to do it for us? Let me finish with this. Validation is great, feelings, but there's definitely a dark side. We do have to move people to awareness. We have to move people to empowerment. And whether you're a therapist or not, I don't care. If you're a friend, don't sit there and listen to your friend all day badmouth their spouse or their boyfriend or girlfriend. Do you think they're telling you the full truth? They're only going to give you the highlights. They're going to say, I'm great, my spouse or whoever, my significant other sucks in all these ways. And you're going to go, yeah, they're bad. I agree with you. Listen, the more you agree with them and not actually hold them accountable for their part of the relationship, you're hurting them. I see so many people, Las Vegas is just filled with drama, especially in gyms. Everybody's trying to get everybody to break up with who they're with. I see it all the time, and none of them have the guts to actually break up their own relationship though, right? But they're always harping on their friends going, yeah, I'm with you. Your spouse sucks. Let's go out over here and have some fun and leave that horrible person at home. People they just kind of make me laugh. Anyway, the goal should be move people towards awareness, move people towards learning, move people towards having the ability to forgive, to make yourself powerful, and to always look for post-traumatic growth. I'm Joe Peroni. This is the Rise Above Project. Hopefully you found some of this valuable, and listen, I could use some subscribers, so please send it to somebody and put a like on it and comment if you like. Even more so if you disagree with me. I like that even more. Thank you.